Hello, everybody. Welcome in, piano people. It is so great to have you here. I hope that we are diving right in and that you are seeing me and hearing me talk and not watching the couple minutes of me just being on the screen trying to start this live stream. I have an exciting announcement, which is that starting in the next couple of weeks, these live streams are going to be regular, a regular Monday afternoon thing. I'm going to probably do them at 12 p.m. Pacific time. So in that process, I will get much better at starting these live streams. And it'll be really fun to connect with all of you and to see you here each Monday for the live streams. So welcome in. I'm so excited to be here and to be talking with you today about rhythm. Rhythm, as you all know, is something, well, or maybe you don't know, but now you know, is something that I am super passionate about. As a recovering person without any sense of rhythm, I feel like rhythm is something that we really need to have a strong sense of when we are learning how to play the piano. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen with you. And while we are going through this class, I want you to get as much out of it as possible. Sorry about that. You got a little bit of a different screen, but hopefully you're getting the correct screen now. There we go. And so go ahead and dive in the chat and let me know where you're joining from. Say hello, introduce yourself if you're comfortable to do that. We're gonna go through some rhythm challenges together. So by the end, we're just gonna really know each other very well. I want you to go away from this class with like a transformed idea about how you think about rhythm and how you practice rhythm and how you approach rhythm in your piano practice routine. So I'm gonna give you some practical techniques that will help you get in touch with your sense of rhythm. And we're going to help you connect to that confidence so that you feel like you really can connect to your rhythm and improve it. If you are a piano player, I'm so excited that you're here. If you're a piano teacher, I'm so excited that you're here. Let me know in your introduction if you'd like to in the chat which one you are so that we can say, hey. And because my goal is to help you sound as good as possible and to make the process of getting from point A to point B as effective and efficient and simple as possible, I'd love for you to just use this time to ask questions. Type them in the chat and I will be paying attention to it. Oh, hello, we have Tracy and Mason and Sealy Music Piano and Nick and Linda. Hey, how's it going, everybody? So great to have you. And Mark, awesome. I want you to ask questions, and you can ask questions as you think of them, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and I will either answer them as they come through, or if you ask a question that is something that I know I'm going to address throughout the course of the hour, then I'll go ahead and throw the question in, when the topic comes up in the presentation. So we're going to dive in with some common first I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Sorry. We're going to bust some common myths about rhythm. We are going to do that for sure because there's a lot of them. We're going to go over some specific exercises to help you strengthen your ability to use the metronome, which, depending on how you feel about the metronome, might be a really scary thing, might sound awful. We're going to review subdivisions and how to count them properly, which will help us when we work to get better at syncopation and when we talk about 2 against 3, which is a really common pain point for a lot of people. And then I'm going to share with you some of my favorite resources for incorporating rhythm into your piano practice routine. So, some common thoughts about rhythm is that rhythm provides the structure for our pieces of music, right? And I put a little picture of a little dancing skeleton here because my friend Stephanie, who's an amazing pianist and instructor, always uses the analogy that rhythm is kind of like the bones. It's what holds everything together. And I think that that's a really good visual. If we imagine not having any bones, we would just kind of like melt to a puddle on the floor and be goop and nothing would function properly, right? And the same is true with rhythm. In our pieces that we're learning or in our piano practice, if we have a good sense of where every beat is and we're comfortable and we're confident counting out loud, we provide ourselves with a structure, not only for where all of the notes fall and for how the piece makes sense musically, but also internally for what's going on inside of us. It's really complicated when we are trying to do so many things at the same time to produce beautiful music. And we need the counting out loud, and we need that rhythmic structure so that our hands can coordinate where they are supposed to be on the piano and when they are supposed to be there. And if we don't have rhythm, that doesn't happen. So often, rhythm is the really sneaky culprit of other issues in our piano playing. So I will often have people that come to me that say, like, I can't coordinate my hands together, or I'm having technical issues, and, like my right hand or left hand wants to play faster than the other one. When we have inaccuracy with notes or pedaling or dynamics or even articulation, a lot of the times, the really sneaky underlying issue with those things is a lack of rhythm, a lack of knowledge about how to count something out loud and how everything fits together rhythmically. So that's where we're going to start. And it's one thing to be able to see rhythm on the page. And by that, I mean the musical symbols, right? Like the quarter notes, the quarter rests, the eighth notes, the eighth rests. It's one thing to see those on the page and to be able to recognize what they are and what they're called and how many beats they get. But it's a completely other thing to be able to bridge the gap between seeing those symbols and knowing what they mean and actually connecting that to our internal pulse and being able to reproduce those symbols as a musical representation of what they are on the page. So we're going to hopefully clear some of that up today. I think all of that just made it sound way more complicated. But my point there is that it is complicated, and I understand that it's complicated, and I feel that it's complicated. And so if you are joining me and you're feeling like you struggle to, teach rhythm to your students, or you struggle in your own practice with rhythm, I feel you there. I used to have awful rhythm. It was something that didn't come naturally to me, and I really had to work very hard with a very patient teacher to get to the point that I felt really confident in my rhythm abilities. All right. So I think one of the biggest myths about rhythm is that you either have rhythm or you don't, right? Like inherently, we just have a good sense of rhythm or we don't have a good sense of rhythm. And I'm curious to know, those of you that are here watching, type in the chat if you've heard this before, or if you've felt this before. Maybe you felt like, you do have a good sense of rhythm, or maybe you felt like you don't. I know growing up through piano lessons, I always felt like I absolutely didn't. And I know that's a black and white way to think about it. And I meet people that feel like they don't have a good sense of rhythm, but it can be developed. Rhythm is inherent. It's all around us, right? Like we all have a heartbeat. And if you can just sit with me for a second and put your hand over your heart, you can tune in to a steady pulse. And your heartbeat might be fast, it might be slow. Of course, there are times when it does an accelerando or when it does a ritardando and when it speeds up and slows down. But we do have that steady pulse right inside of us constantly that we're not always even thinking about, but it's there and it exists. Rhythm is in nature. Rhythm is something that babies love. A steady pulse is very soothing to babies naturally. And so, like I was mentioning before, while it can be complicated to look at the visual representations of rhythm, those symbols, and translate it into being able to produce rhythm, that's where the good work happens. And that's what we're going to dive into now. So in order to get in touch with our internal pulse, our sense of rhythm, we can become besties with the metronome. And I'm curious to know how all of you feel about the metronome. I know I encounter a fair number of people that hate the metronome, that really think it is the devil's tool, but it can be an incredibly helpful tool. And in fact, the metronome and counting work best when we pair them together. The metronome on its own can be effective and cannot be effective depending on how you're using it. But it's a tool just like anything else, and it's a tool that we have to learn how to use. And if we use it properly, it really can help us connect to our internal pulse. It can be frustrating, it can be scary, but I do want you to try to set all of that aside right now, because we're going to talk about some ways to practice with the metronome and some ways to get better with the metronome that will help you in that. So here are some exercises, and these are some of my absolute favorite exercises to develop an inner sense of rhythm and really to connect with our inner sense of rhythm. When we think about looking at symbols on a page, the rhythmic representations, and being able to produce sound, a lot of that starts with simply being able to like produce a steady beat. And if that's not something that we've tried to do before or that we've spent very much time practicing, then it completely makes sense that it's not something that we're going to be able to do very well. So one of my favorite exercises, and I'm going to actually have you all do this along with me, just like if we were in a live class together. I can't see you, so I'm going to trust that you're not just letting me clap on this video like a fool. You can actually clap along with me. We're going to just turn on the metronome to a couple of different speeds, and we're going to practice clapping along with those speeds. And we're just going to see if we can match up with the speed. And I'll stop talking for a few seconds while we do this so you can really hear the click. And I want you to see if you can get right on with the metronome click. So you're not a little bit before, you're not a little bit after, okay? We're gonna start with a moderato speed, a speed that's kind of right in the middle, not too fast, not too slow. And I'm gonna put this right here so that you can see it. So go ahead and clap along with me when you get a sense of the beat. Sometimes I find that like closing my eyes will help. All right, hopefully you were able to get a few claps in there that went along with the metronome. And now we're gonna do that with a slower speed, which is gonna be a little bit harder. So I'm gonna go all the way down to 56, which isn't as slow as I would usually go, but let's go to 56 and we're gonna try it again. So listen first. Yeah, and you can hear that some of my claps are a little bit before or a little bit after the metronome. And so sometimes it'll take me a minute and I'll like close my eyes and really try to tune in with that pulse so that I can predict when it's going to happen. And whether it's you that's practicing this or you're teaching it to a student, one of the things that this addresses is just an ability to gain confidence that we can produce a steady beat, right? Because it's not something that comes natural to a lot of people. And so when we are getting comfortable and exposing ourselves to the metronome and developing a relationship with the metronome, we have to be the ones leading. We can't sit and wait for the metronome to click. If we're waiting for the metronome to click, we're always going to be a little bit behind. But if we're also kind of like on top of the metronome and really trying to anticipate when it clicks, we're often going to be a little bit ahead. And so we have to really settle in and listen and feel and trust that we can, in fact, create that beat that stays steady. And every single time that we choose to clap, we're trusting that we can do that. We're trusting that we can actually produce that beat in a steady way. And this exercise, while it might seem simple, but I don't know if maybe it seems boring to some of you, is hugely powerful because it allows us to develop that trust. And so one of the things that I'll recommend to my students that they do when they're in this stage is to download a metronome app, or even if you just Google metronome, Google has a metronome that will come up on the Google search site. And to just practice setting the metronome to different tempos and clapping along with it. If you are somewhere where you're like in a doctor's office waiting, or you're in the car waiting to pick up a kid from school or something like that, you can do this. You can do it in headphones. You don't necessarily have to clap loudly. You could even just try to anticipate it in your head, or do it with a little like a subtle tap or something like that, so that it's a silent exercise. But this is a really great way to tune into that internal pulse and to build your confidence and trust in yourself that you can maintain a steady beat. The next step in this exercise is to then take it a little bit further and to memorize different metronome tempos. So that would mean that I maybe go back and forth between two tempos. So let's say we just took 56, and I think the other one that we had was like 104. So we would go back and forth between 56 and 104. And we would work to clap along with the metronome, and then to turn off the metronome and to see if we could create that tempo again. So let's try that with 104. So I'm going to turn it on so that we can all hear it. We're going to clap along for a minute, and then I'm going to turn it off. So this is 104. Go ahead and clap along with me and feel that. And now I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to see if we can actually create this pulse on our own, this tempo of 104. Okay, so think about it for a second. If we think it's about here. You can go ahead and clap along. And then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna try to keep this tap going. I'm gonna switch to my knee and I'm gonna turn the metronome on and see if I was able to stick at 104. Pretty close. And so then we would do the same thing with 56, and then we do it with 104, and then we do it with 56. And we'd work with 2 different tempos to see if we could get those to the point that after hours of not having the metronome on, can we just pull that tempo out of thin air? And that's why having an app on your phone or a metronome that you can take around with you can be really helpful, because then you can do this like when you're doing dishes or when there's a commercial on, if you're watching TV. At any point you can do this, and that's kind of one of the things that I love about these metronome exercises is you don't necessarily have to be at the piano to do them. You can do them anywhere. Tracy says, the Dr. Beat metronome saved my life. Yes, Tracy, it did. I know this. And it saved my life too, actually. My college professor was the one that introduced that. So the Dr. Beat metronome, I will link that in the description. It's not in there right now if you look, but I'll put it in after this live stream is over. The Dr. Beat metronome is incredible, and I haven't searched in the last couple months, but I would say in the last couple years I've looked and I haven't found anything like it. It's a metronome that you can actually program to change tempos, to change rhythmic values, so you can address all of those complicated things in more like intermediate and advanced music. You can program like ritardandos into it, accelerandos. You can have it switched from like counting eighth notes to triplets and different things like that. And it will also count multiple subdivisions at the same time. So it will count triplets and eighth notes at the same time for you. And the metronome, I should say, also counts out loud. It has a very intimidating and intense voice that's kind of like a drill sergeant, like 1, E, and I mean, it just sounds like a computer, I guess, but it'll count out loud for you. So it's a really amazing tool if you're someone that really struggles with rhythm. Thanks for reminding me about that, Tracy. I had not forgotten about the Dr. Beat, but it wasn't front and center in my mind. Okay, so then we can work towards, after we get confident clapping along with the metronome and memorizing different tempi with the metronome, we can work towards being able to clap different rhythmic values with the metronome. And this is the next step in our, budding relationship with the metronome. So now I'm going to turn on the metronome, and depending on your level or depending on the level of your student, you can do this in a variety of ways. The simplest way would be to start with maybe 2 different kinds of note values. And it could be really simple, like quarter notes and half notes, or quarter notes and dotted half notes. And you could just go back and forth between clapping those kinds of notes, switching between the 2. For the sake of today, we're not going to go with the easiest example, but I'm also not going to go with the hardest. We'll go a little bit in the middle, and we're going to switch between quarter notes and eighth notes. So this metronome click, I'm going to turn it to about 72. This is going to be our quarter note. And we're going to practice clapping 1, 2, and 3, 4, and so we're doing a quarter note and then 2 eighth notes, a quarter note, 2 eighth notes. And I'm going to go ahead and count it in 4/4 time, just because that's going to provide that extra structure. But if you have never counted out loud, or you're working with a student that has never counted out loud, you might just allow yourself to not count and feel this one. I don't say that very often, but just for this exercise, you could allow yourself to feel it out. But I'm going to count along and you can clap along with me. Bonus points if you count along with me as well. So 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. And so I'm doing quarter, eighth note, quarter, eighth note, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. And if this is too challenging for you, you could do 4 quarter notes in a row and then 4 eighth notes in a row, or even a longer string of notes than that. So you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, and then switch, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2. And you can make them longer so you have more time to settle into the quarter notes, quarter, 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 and then switch. Eighth notes, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. And like I said, you can obviously do different rhythmic values for your level, for your student's level, to address what you need to work on there. Any reason for picking 104 and 56 versus other versus round number? Those are just the ones that on my metronome are easy to get to. And those are also numbers. 104 and 56 are pretty common numbers that we'll see in piano music, and tempos that 56 is a good slow tempo if you're trying to practice something slow. It's not the slowest, but it's slow, and 104 is a good moderato tempo. So mainly random, but also comfortable for a lot of people. Oh, sorry. Wait, I had one other thing on here. Oh yeah, and so then we're going to continue to make advancements with those rhythmic values. So as you get more and more comfortable doing quarter notes and eighth notes, you could introduce triplets or 16th notes, and then you can go back and forth to different combinations of all of the above. You could do dotted notes. You could really, I mean, this exercise is pretty endless with what you could do with it, depending on your level. So now we're going to go and we're going to look at some actual symbols on the page, some actual notes, some visual representations of rhythm. So we've got a whole note, which gets 4 beats. We've got 2 half notes, which each get 2 beats, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and triplets. And this is a great exercise, and it builds on what we were just doing on the last slide, but it helps to connect the feel of that pulse and the feel of those note values to what they actually look like on the page. And so you can pull this exercise up as a next step as well, and you can just make your own rhythm exercises. You can go in order of this page. You could start at the bottom and you could go backwards. You could work on 1 line, you could work on 2 lines. There's a lot of different ways that you could practice this page. For the sake of today, we're going to go through and we're going to start with the first line, and then we're going to work our way down each line just as if we were reading a piece of music. To see if we can get these subdivisions. So we're going to do it together. We'll go through it one time, and then I do want you, if you're willing, to type in the chat and let me know like the percentage that you were able to keep up with. So if you got 100% of the notes, you were able to count it, it was super easy, you can type 100% in the chat. If you got none of it, you can type 0% in the chat, and anything in between. So let's try this one together. We're going to go kind of slow because when we get to those 16th notes and triplets, I don't want to blast us all out of our seats with our tempo. So we're going to go back to, let's go to, just for the sake of it, let's go to 60. Let's choose something different. All right, so I'm going to count, once I start counting, I'll count a full 4 beats, and then we will get started and we'll jump in and we'll clap and hold this whole note. We'll go on to the next line and we'll read through it. I wish there was a way I could have like a little bouncing ball on the screen while I clap, but I haven't figured out how to do that. So I'm going to trust that you can follow along on the screen, and I'm going to actually clap with you. All right, 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly. Nice. Okay, so go ahead and type your percentage in there. I would say that was like for me 90 to 95%. I'm sure you noticed when I switched to the triplets, I was a little off. I was too slow, and then I had to overcompensate for that and speed up for the second beat of triplets. And that's going to happen. And that's why this exercise is so great. You can do it, you know, exactly as it's written, and then we can go through and do different combinations of it. So let's try now. We're going to do some common variations. So we're going to take, and I'm going to write on the screen so that we can all be on the same example here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take just the quarter notes, the eighth notes, and the 16th notes. I put a purple box around it. So we're just going to do those 3 lines, and we're going to try to clap quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, just like that, and see if we can do it. Oh, and there's a big delay because I'm just now seeing the percentage that's coming in. 100%, maybe 90, 100%, pretty good percent, 60%. Nice. Good work, everybody. So let's try this one now. We're going to do quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Let's dive in. I'll count a full 4 beats, and then we'll jump in. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. All right, you'll have to let me know the percentage of that one as well. Now, I could just get really carried away and we could do like all the different combinations of these, but hopefully you understand how this exercise works. And if we have time at the end, if we have time, I'll come back and do some more drilling with you. But you can see how applicable this is and how doing something like this, even if this was your rhythm practice and you did this for 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning or end of your practice session, this would really start to tune you in with that internal pulse and with the various subdivisions. You could obviously find dotted notes, even more iterations of complicated rhythms that you could add into this chart in your practice as well. Awesome. You all are killing it with your percentages. That's amazing. Good work. All right, so we're going to go on and we're going to talk about syncopation. I have gotten a couple of questions about syncopation recently, and so I wanted to address it because it can be really challenging. And I think syncopation, at its most basic definition, is a disruption or interruption of the flow of rhythm. So it's kind of an abstract definition, but when we are talking about Western classical music, oftentimes the strong beats, or the beats that we feel the most in 4/4 time, would be beats 1 and 3. So we generally feel something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We can safely say that in Western classical music, the strongest beat is always the downbeat. That's pretty much always true in Western classical music. When we have a disruption or interruption to that flow, so for example, when we have a longer valued note, like here in example 1, that comes in on the and, it disrupts that feeling. It makes the and feel like there's an accent on it, or makes the and feel like the stronger beat. And so that is an example of syncopation. And I have 2 examples here. This one on the right-hand side is a little bit terrifying. So we'll start with the one on the left-hand side. But these are common ways that syncopation comes up, especially in like ragtime music, in jazz and blues, in pop music that we're, if you have students that are playing stuff that they've heard on the radio, we're going to see a lot of syncopation. And of course, it comes up in Western classical music as well. So I've written down, we have the strong beats here, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, sorry about all those little purple boxes that are popping up. But we have those quarter notes that are just happening on the main beats, the larger beats, the 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then down here, we can see that we have an 8th note on beat 1, which means that our quarter note is coming in on beat and holding through to the and of 2, and we're clapping again on the and of 2, that's holding through to beat 3, and then clapping again on the and of 4, that's holding through the first half of beat 4. So let's go ahead, we're going to establish a pulse, and we're going to establish a strong beat. So we're just going to clap 1, 2, 3, 4 a few times, and I want you to just clap with me to kind of get that back in our heads. 1, 2, 3, 4. We can count the ands if we want to. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, and let's slow it down a little bit. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, when we have the syncopation, we want to keep our anchor points. We want to keep those large beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, in our forefront of our consciousness, even though the rhythm is going to be coming in on the and a lot. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you can see that I'm coming in on the ands for basically every single beat after beat 1. So I clap on 1, then I clap on and, hold through 2, clap on and, hold through 3, clap on and, hold through 4, and rest on and. So I clap 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I want you, we're going to do this in steps. I'm going to just going to keep looping it, and I'm going to clap it and count it. And I want you to maybe just start by counting along with me a few times. And you can count the 1, 2, 3, 4. And then as you're comfortable, you can add the ands. And then once you've heard the rhythm a few times, I want you to dive in with me and see if you can actually count it out loud and clap it at the exact same time. Okay? So let's try. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and I'm going to take with the ands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm curious, let me know in the chat if you were able to count along and clap that syncopation and have it be accurate. When we are counting complicated rhythms, and this goes for syncopation, it also can go for just any rhythm that feels really challenging to us, we have to bridge that gap, like we talked about, of being able to see what's on the page, decipher what's on the page, so like write in the counting and actually understand how it's supposed to be counted, count it out loud, produce the rhythm, and then eventually, as we continue to produce the rhythm, we get to the point that we are feeling it internally. Okay, and that's a lot of steps, and it's a lot of complicated steps. So if you weren't able to do it, that's okay. Let's talk about that process a little bit. So when we encounter a complicated rhythm, first we decipher it. First we have to look at it and we have to say, okay, do I even know what all of these notes are? Do I know how it's counted? And if the answer is no, then we need to do some external research, right? Like comment on one of my videos, reach out to me, ask your teacher, figure out how to count the rhythm. And I do want you to go ahead and write it in your music. And some people are saying in the chat that this is difficult and couldn't understand it. That's okay. We're going to go over the whole process right now. So hopefully by the end of this, you will understand it. So I already did that. I already wrote in the counting for us. And once we've written in the counting, we just always want to double check and make sure that everything is lining up as it should line up. Because the first step in being able to produce a complicated rhythm is understanding like where things go and how things line up, right? So let's talk about that one more time. We've got, in our syncopation rhythm, we have an eighth note, which just gets a half of a beat. So it gets the first half of beat 1. Then we have a quarter note that's coming in on the and, or on the second half of beat 1. And that quarter note is going to hold for an entire beat. And because it's coming in on the second half of beat 1, we're going to hold it up until the second half of beat 2. And that ensures that it gets its full beat. Then on the second half of beat 2, we have an eighth note that's tied to another eighth note. So we hold this eighth note for the second half of beat 2, and then the tie carries over to the first half of beat 3. Then we have a quarter note that comes in on the second half of beat 3, and we hold it up until the second half of beat 4, where we then have a rest for that last half of beat 4. Okay, so that's how I got there with the counting. And now we can go very, very, very slow. And if it's something that feels unattainable or feels like we can't get it there, we can break it down even further. And I can do something like this, where I'm going to actually just do the first syncopation. So just that very first beat and a half. And I'm going to see if I can get that down a few times in a row successfully. Then I can add on from there. So let's try that together. We're just going to clap 1 and 2. Okay? So just those 3 syllables that we're saying. 1 and 2. Again, 1 and 2. And I'm just going to loop this. We're going to do it like 5 to 8 times. Okay? 1 and follow along. 1 and 2. 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 And if I can do that, and I can get that to the point that it feels comfortable, then I can add a little bit more. So now I'm going to add just the next beat. So 1 and 2 and 3. A little bit harder, but let's try it. Stick with me. We'll do that like 5 to 8 times. 1 and 2 and 3. Again. 1 and 2 and 3. Let's do it a few more times. 1 and 2 and 3. 2 more times. 1 and 2 and 3. And then 1 and 2 and 3. Yeah. Let's add the very last note that comes in on the end of 3. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Nice. Let me know what your percentage was in the chat. So I see a good method, a very interesting method. We'll try it with my students. Awesome. And then it helps to imagine writing out the counting and then highlighting the counts that get a clap. Yes. And I'm such a fan of visual learning. And that's why I really advocate for writing it in the music, because it can help you see, especially when you have two hands doing complicated things at the same time, it can help you see how things line up. And you can use various colors, various highlighters to highlight those stronger beats, to highlight the spots that might, creep up and cause a mistake. There's lots of different things that you can do. Sometimes even now to this day, if I'm working on like a really tricky two-handed cadenza, I will occasionally like write out the counting and draw lines like just on the large beat so that it's very obvious what's happening. This is one of the things that I actually love about teaching on Zoom, is this ability to like block out a certain number of notes and force us to just look at a little amount. And if you've seen my videos, you might have seen, or you might have heard me talk about the Postit method a lot. But if you're teaching in person, or if you're working on your music in person and it's a real physical copy of a book, I highly recommend that you have Post-its so that you can actually visually cover things up. It simplifies it, not only because you're forced to just play a smaller section of music, but it also really helps you to simplify it visually, because you can't see what's happening after that. And sometimes in order for our brains to really feel like something is simple, we have to just focus on that one thing. So being able to cover things up and just break it down to a very small piece can be so incredibly helpful. So with syncopation, with any complicated rhythm, this is a really great way to break it down, what we just did. We, again, decipher, we write in the counting, we make sure that we understand what it is that we're doing and where the notes actually go and how they're counted. We break it down to the point that we can have success. And that's going to vary depending on the example and depending on you. You might be doing one note at a time. You might be doing one hand at a time. You might be going at like a very uncomfortable sloth speed because you're going so slow. We need to simplify it to the point that it makes sense and we can have success. Because once we find that point where we can do it, we can always build from there, right? Like we can always add the layers on to make it a little bit more complicated, but we need to break it down to that point that we have success before we can make things more complicated. Drawing lines helps me. It's the method I use to get through a tricky measure. That's awesome, Phil. Yeah, I do the same thing. I think drawing lines can be very, very helpful, especially when we're talking counting between two hands, because it also helps you to see like where the hands fit together in addition to where those beats are. All right, we're gonna go over one more tricky concept, and then I'm gonna give you some ways to actually like make rhythm a part of your routine, and some resources to do so. So this is another one of the common questions that I get, is how to do polyrhythms, specifically 2 against 3. And I do have a whole video that explains it, and I'll link that in the description for sure, so you can watch that one as well. But 2 against 3 comes up often. It comes up actually in like probably late elementary, early intermediate piano pieces in the Western classical canon, and then it just keeps coming up after that. So it's important to be comfortable doing it. And I think there's a lot of mystery and a lot of fear around 2 against 3, especially if you're on the side of 2 against 3 where you're not quite sure how to do it yet. So I want to just demystify it a little bit for a few minutes, and then we'll go on. So 2 against 3 is when one hand is playing triplets and one hand is playing eighth notes, and it'll switch. Sometimes, as you can see on my example, sometimes it's the right hand that's playing triplets and the left hand that's playing eighth notes, and sometimes it's the reverse of that. And it doesn't really matter, you count it the same way. But I have a method that works pretty well for counting 2 against 3. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to come up with a specific way to count triplets. And I know this isn't a super common way to count triplets, but it is the best way. So I would highly recommend that you count triplets as la-lees. So 1 la-lee, 2 la-lee, 3 la-lee, 4 la-lee. And you can all say it with me and we can have a good laugh at the fact that it kind of sounds a little bit silly. But it's a great way to count triplets. There are a couple of other ways to count triplets. One common way is that people just say triplet, 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 and that does account for the triplet. You do get all 3 syllables in there, but that way I don't like, because there's not a way for you to account where you are in the measure. So we're losing the beat. I don't know if I'm on beat 1 or if I'm on beat 4, and as soon as my music gets a little bit more complicated, that doesn't serve me as well, because I need to know where I am in the measure so that I know how the hands line up. Another way that people will count triplets is like 1 and a. And it's also a fine way to count triplets. I don't like that way because it sounds too similar to one and or one e and a. And it becomes really complicated, especially when we are combining triplets with eighth notes or triplets with 16th notes, to count those and to account for all of the notes without getting incredibly confused about, first of all, the mouthful that we're trying to say, and second of all, where the beats are actually lining up with each other. So I do lolly, and it will make more sense once I explain how they line up. But my preliminary exercise for 2 against 3 is very similar to what we were doing earlier today, where we turn on the metronome and we just practice going back and forth between triplets and eighth notes. And you can do that ad nauseum forever until it feels totally natural, because it's generally not something that feels natural for people, especially switching to 3 in a beat can feel very unusual because it's not that even. We're not splitting the beat in half, we're splitting it into thirds, which is just a little bit more ambiguous. So once you have done that, and once you're comfortable switching between triplets and eighth notes, and you're comfortable counting 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, then we can start to look at how 2 against 3 fits together. Now, this is where the method of counting really comes in handy, because you can see up here that I have 1 la, li, and down here I have 1 and I'm able to count both of them at the same time. So my ones come together. Beat 1 is played at the exact same time in both hands. Then comes the la, and then the and is squeezed right between the la and the li. Okay, and so it becomes, and I'm going to try to demonstrate this without knocking my computer over. It becomes 1 la and li, 1 la and li, and I can actually say both subdivisions. I'm counting a triplet at the same time that I'm counting an eighth note, and I'm able to account for both in my counting, which is pretty fantastic. The other thing that I like to do when teaching or playing 2 against 3 is to take a minute and to get in touch with the actual coordination that is taking place. And this can be something that can be helpful for rhythm. It depends on the person. If it doesn't resonate with you, don't do it. There's not a reason to do it if it doesn't help you. Only do it if it helps you. And same with teachers. If you're using this for your students and it's not working, it might not be the right fit for your student. But for some people, it really clicks. And it is to actually narrate the coordination of what's happening. So when we're doing the 2 against 3 and we're doing this example here that I've drawn the red lines on, what's happening is we're playing together, right, left, right. Okay, so we can actually say that a few times to give our hands really clear signals and directions about what it is that we're doing. So let's do that. Together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right, together, right, left, right. And my triplets are a little bit lopsided at this stage, but that's okay because I'm just getting that coordination down of being able to do that. So go ahead and say it with me a couple of times. Together, right, left, right. 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 Now, once you have that coordination down of, together, right, left, right, now let's go back and let's actually apply the counting to it. So it's 1, la, and li. So we're going to loop that a few times, and you can alternate between the 1, la, and li and the together, right, left, right, and see, how you can kind of bridge the gap between the two. So 1, la, and li, together, right, left, right. 1, la, and li, together, right, left, right. Now I'm just going to count it. 1, la, and li. 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 Nice. Let me know in the chat if you're getting this. Whenever the chat gets a little bit quiet, I get a little bit nervous that people are either really getting it or completely lost. But I hope you're not completely lost in this. And you can hopefully at least see why the la li is a very helpful way to count the triplets, because upon the introduction of eighth notes and triplets at the same time, it's a very, very clear way to count the 2 at the same time. So when we go to switch that around, we can now have the eighth notes in the right hand and the triplets in the left hand. And the great thing is that the rhythm is the same, right? The rhythm is the same, it's just the coordination is slightly different. So we're still going to count 1, la, and li. It's just that the coordination is flipped. So we can say together, left, right, left. together, left, right, left, together, left, right, left, together, left, right, left. And we can do the exact same counting with the 1 La and Li, but just reversed in the hands. So hopefully that was helpful for 2 against 3. It's something that takes practice, and with rhythm and with polyrhythms in particular, because like I said at the beginning, we're bridging the gap between seeing the physical representations or the symbols of the notes and actually being able to feel something internally and produce it externally. It takes a little bit of experimenting. And when you're practicing, you are going to mess up, but you kind of have to like mess up and then trust that you can try again, and then mess up and then trust that you can try again. And you will start to get it to the point that you can do it. And then eventually the amount of times that you can do it will start to outweigh the amount of times that you can't do it, right? And that's when we really start to feel these rhythms internally and be able to produce them externally. So with something like 2 against 3 or with syncopation, trust the process. Go super slow. I like to use the movie Zootopia as a representation of how slow I'm talking about, and I'm not sure if any of you have seen that movie, but there's a scene where they're at the DMV and it's sloths that are working at the DMV, and when I saw the movie for the first time, I was like actually physically uncomfortable with how slow the scene goes, because the sloth is just moving at a sloth speed. And so I like to call that visual to mind as a reminder of how slow we sometimes have to go when we're doing really complicated things in music, really complicated things at the piano. And if you need to channel that sloth speed, you can pull up that Zootopia scene. I'm sure it's on YouTube. And just remind yourself that it is okay to go that slow. That doesn't mean that you'll never get it fast. In fact, if you just focus on doing it correctly and allowing yourself that time and space at a slow speed and stop focusing on trying to get it faster, it'll be surprising how quick it does go. Okay, we're going to go on and we're going to talk a little bit about, oops, I'm going to delete my red lines. We're going to talk a little bit about how to incorporate rhythm practice as a part of your regular practice routine. So I've already given you, right at the beginning, we dove in and we talked about some ways that you can really get comfortable with the metronome. And so doing that for 2 to 5 minutes in your practice routine, either at the piano or incorporating that into different parts of your day. I once had a student that was so committed, I love this so much, that she kept a metronome in her bathroom, and when she was brushing her teeth in the morning and at night, she would use that as her metronome practice, right? You could do it when you're doing dishes. At any point, you could work to strengthen your relationship with the metronome, and that would be time very well spent. But when we need more and we need help bridging the gap of like we feel solid with the metronome, or we're already doing that, and we want to get better at accurately interpreting rhythms, being able to sight read rhythms, being able to produce those rhythms correctly, that's when we might need to incorporate rhythm as a part of our regular practice routine. So one of the things that we can do is just start to be more mindful of rhythm in our pieces. So like we were talking about before with the syncopation, we can write the counting in, and we can make sure that we understand exactly how to count every single measure in every single piece that we're working on. And I'm curious, and you could let me know in the chat, if you were to just take a quick inventory of the pieces that you're working on right now, do you know exactly how to count all of them out loud accurately? And if the answer is yes, that's amazing. You're ready for the next suggestion. And if not, then that would be a very good starting point. Lolly, someone uses berry. Oh, that's great. I like that. Sealy music, I like that a lot. So like 1 berry, 2 berry, 3 berry. That is the same kind of idea, and you can intersperse other syllables with that as well. Okay, so if you know how to count all of your pieces and you have the counting written in and you know how to interpret them, then the next thing that you can do is you can commit to always counting out loud. Always. And I can say that, okay, like 95% of the time you're counting out loud, right? When we're performing, we're not gonna be counting out loud. There are times where we're doing something and we're not counting out loud, but you can bring the counting out loud and the rhythm to the forefront of your mind. And counting out loud is really the best way to do that. When we count out loud, I will often hear students, if they're not counting out loud and I ask them to count out loud, I will often hear them say, it messes me up. And it can be very true that when we start to count out loud, we hear a lot of mistakes. But often what's happening is not that the counting out loud is making you mess up. Sometimes that is the case because you're adding a layer of complication and you're engaging your brain in a different way. And so it can cause more mistakes. But often what's happening is you're just noticing more mistakes. You're just noticing the mistakes that were already there. It's just that once you start to count out loud, it becomes very obvious where those mistakes are because you know exactly where you are in your music and you're very focused, because it's almost impossible for our mind to drift or for us to get distracted when we're counting out loud. It keeps us completely present, completely tuned in to exactly what it is that we're doing. So our mistakes or the things that maybe don't sound as good as we thought they did become a lot more apparent when we're counting out loud. So in practice, I would say 90 to 95% of the time we should be counting out loud. And when I'm performing, I'm counting out loud. I'm counting in my head out loud, very loudly in my head, screaming at myself. Okay, the third thing we can do is focus on the rhythm of your pieces, especially when you're just starting them. So oftentimes we just dive in and start with notes, right? And we can actually take the time to just look at the rhythm, to ignore the notes and to not even put our hands on the keys. But once we've written in that counting, we might take a few minutes or several days or a couple weeks, depending on your level and what you're working on, to just clap and count the rhythm of the piece out loud, and to help you start to internalize the feel of the rhythm. Because imagine if you could dive into a piece that was maybe a little bit challenging and you already had a sense of what the rhythm felt like. You can approach it with so much more confidence, with so much more like feeling of groundedness in a rhythmic sense at least, and so much more structure, and so the other things can feel a lot easier. So just focusing on the rhythm of your pieces or of your students' pieces can be a really, really, really helpful way that you can start incorporating practice of rhythm into your routine without even other resources or bringing other things into your routine. Now, I do have some favorite things that I use to incorporate rhythm into my students' routines and people that I work with. So one of those things is rhythm flashcards, and I'll give you kind of like the pros and cons of all of these things. So the rhythm flashcards are great because they're easy, they're transportable, they come in a stack, there's a lot of them, and you would get to the point where eventually you would probably memorize them, but that's a good thing because then you're going to memorize all of these really common patterns that you're going to see in music. But it will take you a while to get there because they're double-sided, and I think there's like 50 of them, so it's quite a few rhythms. These are great for rhythm in small doses. So if you are really short on time, or you know that you're like, I'm maxed out, I don't have extra time to practice on rhythm, you could easily do like 3 flashcards in the middle of something else or on your way to something else in like a quick 30-second break. They're really great for people that maybe haven't practiced rhythm before, or people who really feel like their rhythm is lacking. So also for beginners. And they're good for the idea if you're new to practicing rhythm. So like if you've never practiced rhythm, you've never focused on rhythm, the rhythm flashcards are a great digestible way because it's just one little flashcard. And you could theoretically do 1 flashcard per day. And if you haven't ever worked on your rhythm before, that's a lot more rhythm than you focused on in the past. And so that would be a huge improvement. Okay. Another a fun way to practice, this one is really cool, the Rhythm Cat app. If you're an app person or maybe you have students that are into games, Rhythm Cat app is really cool because it's a gamified way to practice rhythm, and so that makes it fun and interesting and kind of novel in concept. It's good if you want to have a little bit more fun. If you feel like rhythm is like a barrier where you're like, I hate rhythm, I'm bad at rhythm, I don't want to practice rhythm, the Rhythm Cat app might be a good option for you. I kind of wish that I had a Rhythm Cat app when I went down my rhythm journey. It's great. The Rhythm Cat app in particular, there's a couple of different levels when I looked today, actually, now that there didn't used to be. So I think it could take you through more of an intermediate advanced level, but it starts at the beginner, and so it's really good for beginners. The Rhythm Cat app is great for bridging the gap between internal and external rhythm, because the way that it works, and I don't know, I couldn't get this to work earlier. I actually did like a video of, oh, maybe it will work. I don't know if you'll get the sound though. I did a video, so it gives you a count off, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you tap the button and you're tapping where the rhythm is, but there's actually a background track playing music the entire time. And so with the quarter notes, you're essentially just kind of like keeping the beat. But as this gets more complicated, you're doing eighth notes and dotted rhythms and rests and all sorts of things. And while you are tapping these rhythms, there's background music playing. So it helps to bridge the gap between producing a rhythm out of thin air on our own that's just like a percussive clapping sound to actually applying it to something that sounds like the piece that we're working on or sounds like music that you might actually play. So that's one of the reasons that the Rhythm Cat app is fun. There's also, I forgot to put this in this presentation, but there's also, if you just Google or if you go to YouTube and you look like 4/4 time 120 BPMs, you'll find backing tracks. And so if you want to clap to something that's at a steady beat, but that has more musical context than just the metronome, you can actually turn on a backing track at a specific tempo in a specific time signature, and you can do some rhythm practice that way. And that's another way to kind of bridge the gap between like the physical symbols that you're seeing on the page, the internal feeling, and the reproduction of that sound, but in a musical context. One of my absolute favorite books is Rhythmic Training by Robert Starr. I talk about it all the time. I feel like I am the spokesperson for this book, but it's incredibly comprehensive. It's affordable. It's not very expensive, which is great because one of my other favorite books is like over $100. But this one is really great. It's linked in the description. It starts at the beginning, but has a really wonderful trajectory through a very advanced level. I have taken many people through the entire book, and when they are done with the entire book, they are a completely different musician than they were at the beginning. But even for beginners, you can start and you can go through the book very, very slowly. It could theoretically take you several years to get through the book. And so in that way, it's a great way to have one resource that you know will take you from the beginner stages all the way through and follow you along in your piano journey for years. And you can just do, one exercise for a couple weeks until you've got it down. Then you can move on to the next exercise. I like this a lot because it helps you make progress in an organized and a measurable way as well. Oh, someone in the chat has played Rhythm Cat. That's awesome. And got the flashcards. Awesome, Tracy. If we had time, I was going to take you through an example from this book, but we don't have time. But I do have a video. I did a group class where we went through some of these exercises, and so I'll be releasing another video about this book where we actually go and drill some of them. All right, I think I have one more for you. So the last book that I like, and this one is not specific to rhythm, but it's a great way to incorporate rhythm, is Sight Reading and Rhythm Every Day by Helen Marley. And that one looks like this, and I've put an example of the page. So this book is great. I have a whole video on it, and the focus is mostly sight reading, but I love the way this book is organized because it has like a page that's just for one day of practice, and then it has another day of practice. And so it kind of does the work of organizing it in a digestible way because it gives you specific exercises to do on each day, and it's organized in 5-day practice weeks. And then in each of those days of sight reading practice, there are a couple of short rhythm practice exercises as well. So it's small, accessible examples, which is great. It works on rhythm and sight reading kind of together at the same time. This one is mostly one-handed examples. So you're not going to get the Robert Starr, the Rhythmic Training book I was just talking about, is 2 lines. So you actually get like the hand coordination work, whereas this one is just going to be rhythm and it's just one-handed. This one is really great for total beginners, or like I said, for anyone that wants to work on sight reading as well. So these are all linked in the description below, and if I'm missing links, I will go through and check after I'm done and make sure they're added. Does anybody have questions about rhythm? I know a couple of you, I love hearing from all of you as we go through these live streams. It's really great to hear like if it's working for you and all of that, but I'm also curious, I didn't get a ton of questions. If anybody has questions about rhythm, like I said in the beginning, it's something I'm super passionate about because it brings up so many issues when it's unchecked. If we are, consciously or unconsciously not paying attention to rhythm, it can really, really mess with our playing and ultimately with our progress. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. I did, of course, come up with some homework for all of you. And so as you're typing in your questions, I'll go ahead and go over some of the homework. So I want you to pick a method. Pick one of the methods. We went over so many of them for incorporating rhythm into your regular practice routine. And I want you to start doing that, even if it's 1 minute a day, even if it's 1 flashcard a day. I want you, with your practice or with your students' practice, to actually start doing rhythm every single day and having a little bit of time that is devoted just to rhythm. I want you to commit to counting out loud in your practice, always. This is something you can do even if you don't have time to add rhythm into your practice. You can commit to counting right now. You can go ahead and subscribe to my channel and check out, I have an entire playlist about rhythm because I've done lots of videos about rhythm. So there's lots and lots of good nuggets of information in those videos. And so you can definitely go to those as a resource. And then, let's see, I feel like I'm... Yes, if you master your rhythm, you will excel in your playing. Absolutely, Sharon. It's like one of the things that I think holds people back most often is just not having a good grip or a good understanding of rhythm and a good framework around which to address it. So you'll have to do that, and you'll have to let me know how it goes. And then if you want to take your playing to the next level and book a call with me, I do offer some free 15-minute lessons, and the link to that will be below as well. And I hope this was helpful for all of you. You'll have to comment on the video and let me know where you are with rhythm. Let me know, what your rhythm practice has been like so far, and share what you're looking forward to in your rhythm practice if you're going to reevaluate your methods, and let me know what works with you. It's been so good to have you here. I am so grateful for all of you. And I will see you all later. Happy